Hey, how are ya? I hope you're well. Today we're going to be talking about cottagecore, what it is, how it started, and what it means to the people who participate in this subculture. So for this video I made the most cottagecore drawing I could. Here's the mood board I made for it. I actually really like this, and wow, it helped so much with the drawing. If you don't make mood boards yet, you should try it, because I was like so surprised at how much it actually helped. Also, sorry if I sound weird, it's pollen season, we're all suffering. The aesthetic first started developing in the 2010s, and by 2017 it had its name, Cottagecore. Now, in case you're wondering, cottage is obviously referring to cottage, and the word core relates to the 80s hardcore punk music scene, and now the word core is used to describe a category or genre. I never knew where the term came from, but that's it. So, in the early 2010s it was developing, but by 2019 into 2020, the aesthetic was extremely popular, absolutely booming on sites like Tumblr, Instagram, and especially TikTok. According to Urban Dictionary, cottagecore, also known as farmcore and countrycore, is inspired by a romanticized interpretation of Western agricultural life. It's centered on ideas of simple living and harmony with nature. Things that are popular in the cottagecore trend are countryside scenery, nostalgic peasant dresses, rustic handmade crafts, mushrooms, frogs, illustrations from books like Frog and Toad, freshly baked bread, wicker baskets, flowers, and floral patterns. Colors that are often associated with cottagecore are green, brown, yellow, and cream or off-white. Very natural tones. Some believe that the aesthetic was inspired by fairy tales, but because of the dark elements in the original fairy tales before they were changed to be more appropriate for children, they realized that's probably not it, and that cottagecore is more so a concept with things like nature idealization, nostalgia for a medieval past, and historical inspiration from old-time farming. There's also a lot of inspiration pulled from concepts like witches, gnomes, and fairies. Ramona Jones, a social media influencer, said, "Cottagecore embodies the idea of a sustainable lifestyle in harmony with nature. Aesthetically, it's a nod to the traditional, romantic, and nostalgic English countryside." To some cottagecore supporters, the movement is a reaction against the capitalist consumer society and the increasing time spent in front of computer screens. Because of this, wellness and sustainability is at its core. Cottagecore also tries to ease or prevent burnout with its enjoyment of life's mundane tasks. The overall concept of cottagecore is the desire to live a quiet and straightforward life. No cell phones, no messages, no labor beyond what's necessary. This is kind of ironic because the majority of cottagecore consumption is online. Social media is where cottagecore thrives, despite the concept of the movement being what it is. The modern cottagecore perception is less about living a rural lifestyle and more about longing for it or pretending you live it, said Ellen Tin, I think that's how you pronounce her name. Sorry, I don't know. She's a popular Instagram cottagecore proponent and designer from Russia. The idea of cottagecore is a yearning for it rather than actually living it, because when you think about it, living a realistic cottagecore lifestyle has many less than ideal drawbacks. Living alone in the woods is not as dreamy as online cottagecore enjoyers would like to believe. Oftentimes, that's such a hard word for me to say. Oftentimes, rural areas have problems with no internet, roads, electricity, floods, not to mention bugs, snakes, other wildlife, and having to travel at least an hour to get anywhere. Complete isolation. Also, while many people online love the idea of living a cottagecore pastoral life, for others, it's an inescapable reality. A life of isolation, unable to move or travel or get into contact with others. Nevertheless, features of a pastoral life appeal to those who can only have it in the online world. So why is cottagecore so popular? It was majorly popular during the lockdowns, when people finally started slowing down with the amount of free time they were forced to have and started baking and gardening, knitting, painting, doing embroidery. It was a coping mechanism, an escape from the harsh reality of the pandemic, wishful thinking. Many online cottagecore participants shop secondhand. They grow veggies from home and cook their meals at home rather than going out. They try to consume ethically or make things by hand, not shopping beyond what you need. Sustainability is important in the cottagecore world, and to be honest, I think that's something we can all get behind. I think at least a bit of sustainability is really important. You never know when the apocalypse is gonna strike. The aesthetic is very popular amongst the LGBTQ+ community. The hashtag Cottagecore lesbian is very popular on TikTok, and goblincore is very popular with the non-binary folks. Cottagecore's clothing aspects also don't conform to the traditional gender roles, and it seeks to remove the traditional life stigma and stereotypes from the aesthetic's cultural past. Interestingly, there are some crossovers with the Tumblr tradwife community and the cottagecore community, and while usually they stand politically opposed, they have similarities in aesthetics and even in some aspects, like living a somewhat traditional life and simple life and baking and gardening and things like that. I believe nowadays the Tumblr tradwife community is less bad. I think more rational people have joined who just want to bake and stuff, and there's less like, she knows about her German roots type stuff, if you know what I mean. Thankfully. But don't quote me on that. I don't know. I think. Anyway, so cottagecore only got its name around 2017, but similar aesthetics and ideas have existed long before Tumblr. The ancient Greeks, having characterized the geographical Arcadia as a inhabitable and inhospitable place, started to imagine an idealized Arcadia as a representation for simple rural life and a spiritual haven after the effects of the industrial life began getting to them. Even back then, the Greek poet Theocritus wrote poems about shepherds and shepherdesses in 3rd century BC, causing him to be cited as the inventor as pastoral poetry. The market for his work was mostly the educated urban class of Alexandria, Egypt, who were seeking an escape from the filth, crowdedness, and disease of city life. Very similar to modern-day cottagecore, honestly. In the 1st century BC, a Roman poet named Virgil's pastoral poetry was written in a response to violence and war. He expanded the genre by acknowledging moral and political issues such as war while maintaining the pastoral trope. Pastoral escapism continued to be produced in novels such as Daphnis and Chloe from 2nd century AD. It returned as the theme in the Renaissance through the 14th century by an Italian poet, Petrarch. I hope I'm pronouncing that okay. And William Shakespeare wrote 2 pastoral plays, As You Like It and A Winter's Tale. They also reflect the inherent tension between the pastoral theme compared with its intended aristocratic audience. The counterculture in the 1960s has the most significant influence for the cottagecore movement, though. Thrifted furniture and art pieces from the 60s and 70s are often used to create a comforting, cozy space, as are the patterns of the era like paisley and mushroom prints. In my own experience online, I know that musicians like Hosier are popular among the cottagecore community. I've really enjoyed cottagecore for a while now. I love the aesthetic, the fashion, and the idea of sustainability. Look at my sheets though, aren't they cute? I think it's important that we recognize though that while we have this idealized and romanticized idea of the aesthetic and movement, it's much different viewing it online and actually living it in real life. While some believe that cottagecore is just a yearning for a simpler life or an aesthetic that's popular on TikTok, I think it's clear that there are many people who view this subculture not only as an aesthetic, not only as an escape, but as a political statement and movement, and as a community. Even as a community with opposing political beliefs, like the tradwives. Also, this idea has been around way longer than Tumblr and TikTok, way longer than a lot of other concepts and political movements, and I think it really speaks to how we live and how we have lived, that people for centuries have been longing for a simpler life. I know I do sometimes. Phones and computers and messages and this idea of being available 24/7 because you have your phone with you at all times could be really stressful, which sounds stupid, but it's true. And sometimes just going off on your own and living in the woods can sound really appealing, but isolation will definitely take a toll. But if nothing else, cottagecore is just beautiful visually, and using it as a form of escapism isn't hurting anyone, so I think that's great, you know? It's understandable. I know my thoughts at the end here are kind of jumbled, but that's part of the appeal of cottagecore, isn't it? Having conflicting thoughts like the aristocrats who watched Shakespeare's pastoral plays or read the pastoral poems. Anyway, what's your thoughts on cottagecore? Do you like it for the aesthetic, or do you see it as a political movement as well? Let me know. Thank you for watching. I'll see y'all later.